Chapter 1. Introduction. Inside a 17th century Kyoto tea house after dark. In the year 1640, in a back lane of Kyoto, where the houses lean so close together that neighbors can pass a bowl of rice from one window to the next, there is a doorway you would almost certainly miss. It is made of plain cedar, weathered to the color of old smoke. It is barely the 2 feet square. And to enter the room beyond it, a grown man, a samurai with 2 swords at his hip, a merchant with silver in his sleeve, a poet, a priest, a general who has ordered the deaths of hundreds, must first remove his weapons, kneel down in the dirt, and crawl, on his hands and knees, into the dark. The room itself is smaller than a modern walk-in closet, 4.5 mats of woven straw, which is to say about 9 feet square. The walls are mud and straw, the color of a wet riverbank. There is no furniture. There are no chairs. There is no fire for warmth, only a small sunken hearth for heating water. There is one alcove holding 1 scroll and 1 flower in 1 vase. And there is, on this particular evening, a single candle, not even an oil lamp. Just 1 hand-dipped taper, throwing a small, trembling circle of gold against an ocean of shadow. Here is the part that still puzzles people 4 centuries later. This was not poverty. The men who built these tiny dark rooms could have afforded palaces, and many of them owned palaces. They had gold screens and silk robes and lacquer that took a craftsman a year to finish. And yet the most powerful people in all of Japan, the warlords who could end a life with a nod, the merchants who could buy a province, competed with one another, sometimes bitterly, for the privilege of crawling through a hole in the wall to sit in the dark and drink a single bowl of bitter green tea. Why? Why would a culture that worshipped rank and display build, at its very pinnacle, a room designed to strip rank away at the door? We will get there. It is the question underneath this entire evening, and the answer is not the one most people expect. But first, we need to watch how the evening begins. There is a second mystery folded inside the first, and it concerns the darkness itself. The host tonight will go to a great deal of trouble to keep this room dim. He will light exactly enough flame to see by, and not 1 bit more. He will arrange the evening so that the most important moment, the moment the tea is whisked into a bright green foam, happens in light, so low you can barely make out the color. A man wealthy enough to flood the room with a dozen lamps chooses, instead, 1 candle. Hold on to that. We will not understand why the room is dark until we understand nearly everything else about the people inside it. So before we go any further, a small request, offered the way the host tonight would offer anything quietly and without pressure. If the kind of history we do here gives you something the slow kind, the patient kind, the kind that respects the fact that you have lived long enough to know the difference between noise and substance, then a like or a subscribe genuinely helps. These continue. And if you have ever practiced the tea ceremony yourself, or studied in Japan, or remember a grandmother who kept the old courtesies alive, I would be honored to read about it in the comments below. So settle in. Dim the lights if you can. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum that fills a quiet room. We are going to spend the next while in a single evening in a single small room in Kyoto, almost 400 years ago, and we are going to take our time, because taking time is the entire point of the thing we are about to watch. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Prepares the Room. Life in the Mizuya. Her name is Kiku, and the light is already failing by the time she finishes the bowls. She is perhaps 22 years old, though she would have to stop and count back through the rice harvests to be sure, and she has no particular reason to. She kneels on the bare wooden floor of the small back room they call the Mizuya, the water room, the place where everything is washed and readied, and where, by long custom, the guests will never set foot. Her hands are doing what they have done most evenings for the better part of 7 years. She wipes the rim of a tea bowl with a damp linen cloth, turns it a quarter, wipes again, turns, wipes, until the whole lip of it has passed under her fingers twice. The bowl is not dirty. She washed it this morning. She's wiping it because the wiping is part of the thing, and because the master will know he always knows if a bowl comes to his hand, carrying even the faint mineral film that the well water leaves behind as it dries. Kiku does not own this house. She does not own the bowls, or the well, or the indigo kimono on her back, which belongs, in the way these things are reckoned, to the household that took her in. She is the daughter of a Nishijin weaver 3 lanes over the silk weaving quarter, the part of Kyoto where the looms clack from before dawn until the light gives out, and she came here as a girl because there were too many mouths at her father's table and not enough thread on his loom in the lean years. This is not a story she finds sad. It is simply the arithmetic of her world, the way you might think of the weather. Her father owed money to the silk wholesalers, who answered in turn to the great merchant houses, who in their turn paid careful, quiet respect to samurai officials who outranked them on paper and were, just as often, poorer than the men bowing to them. Kiku knows all of this the way she knows which floorboard creaks. She does not think of it as a system. She thinks of it as the names of people you bow to and how low. Tonight there will be one guest. Kiku knows this because the master told her this morning, which is itself unusual. He rarely explains, and she rarely needs him to. One guest means a particular kind of evening. It means the smallest and oldest of the tea rooms, the one with the crawl-through door and the single window. It means the good bowl, not the showy one, the quiet one, the one with the glaze that pools dark at the bottom like water in a well. And it means she will spend the next several hours almost entirely invisible, moving between the water room and the edge of the tea room, refilling, carrying, kneeling, withdrawing, a pair of hands that the evening requires, and the evening is designed never to notice. She's made her peace with this too. There is a particular dignity, she has decided, in being the part of a beautiful thing that no one sees. Whether she is right about that is a question she turns over more often than she would admit. Consider what it takes simply to make the water hot. There is no tap to turn, no dial, no switch. Kiku drew the water this afternoon from the well in the corner of the garden, hauling it up hand over hand in a wooden bucket that has worn the rope into a soft fray, and she carried it in and let it stand, because the master believes, and he is not entirely wrong, that water tastes of the bucket and the haste if you use it too soon. The charcoal she is now coaxing into an even smokeless glow was made from a particular hardwood, cut to particular lengths, and it cost more than you might think. Good tea charcoal was its own small luxury, the kind of thing a household economized on everywhere else in order to afford. Those who grew up heating a house with a coal stove, or who remember a mother feeding a wood range to cook a Sunday dinner, will understand the truth of it in their hands. Fire is work. Steady fire is skilled work, and fire that must burn cleanly enough that its smoke never touches the taste of the tea that is something close to an art, and it is hers. And here's the small revelation that the early part of this evening turns on, the thing most people get entirely backwards about the tea ceremony. When you picture it, if you picture it at all, you probably picture the host, the serene master, the slow, elegant gestures, the famous whisking of the green foam. But almost everything that makes that serenity possible happens out here, in the water room, in the dark, before the guest ever arrives, done by hands the ceremony will pretend are not there. The calm of the tea room is not the absence of labor. It is labor so thoroughly completed beforehand that it has become invisible. Kiku is the reason the master will appear to do nothing difficult. She is the submerged 9/10 of the iceberg, and she has known since she was 15 that the whole serene, weightless surface of the evening floats on the work of women like her, and that this too is something the room is built to keep in shadow. There is an order to the water room that Kiku could reproduce blindfolded, and on a night like this, she nearly has to, because the master will not abide a fumble. Everything has its place and its sequence. The bowls stacked by size, the cloths folded so the corners square, the whisk stood upright so its delicate tines never bear weight, the ladle laid at a particular angle, the fresh charcoal sorted by length into the basket. When she was a girl of 15, newly arrived, she broke a whisk by setting a heavy lid against it, and the master did not scold her. He simply looked at the broken thing for a long moment, and then at her, and that look taught her more than a beating would have. She has not broken one since. The discipline of the water room, she came to understand, is not fussiness. It is the difference between an evening that flows like water and one that stumbles, and the stumble, in this house, is always the fault of the hands no one sees. She tastes the broth one more time before she covers it, the way her own mother taught her to taste, with the tip of the tongue and then the back, judging not just the salt but the depth, the way the flavor of the dried kelp and the shavings of fish have given themselves up to the water without leaving any harshness behind. This is knowledge that lives in no book she could read, and in fact Kiku reads little. It came to her hand from her mother, who had it from hers, a chain of women's competence passed down in kitchens that no scholar ever thought worth recording. The master can lay a charcoal fire like a poem and read a scroll the way other men read a ledger, but he cannot make this broth, and they both know it, and neither will ever say so. It is simply understood that there are kinds of knowing that belong to the water room and kinds that belong to the tea room, and that the wall between them is thin enough to pass a tray through, and thick enough that the two will, by custom, never quite meet. When everything is ready, Kiku does a small private thing she has never told anyone. She kneels for a moment in the water room, settles her breath, and smooths the front of her kimono with both hands, the way the master settles himself before he enters the tea room, because she has decided, without permission and without anyone noticing, that her work is part of the same ceremony and deserves the same composure. No one taught her this. No one would think to. But she has watched the master for 7 years, and she has understood something he may not have meant to teach, that the spirit of the thing is not confined to the famous room with the famous guest, that it lives wherever a person does ordinary work with complete attention. She rises. She takes up the tray, and she steps toward the doorway and the warm glow beyond, ready to be, once more, the unseen half of a beautiful evening. We will come back to Kiku through the evening, because the evening cannot proceed without her, and because the question of who is seen and who is not seen turns out to matter a great deal to the answer we are circling. But there is a sound at the garden gate. Not a knock exactly, the soft scuff of sandals being set down on stone, and the guest has arrived. Before we meet him, before we follow the master into the room, we need to walk back out into that garden, into the last of the blue light, because the evening does not begin at the door of the tea room. It begins much earlier and much further out, in a strip of cultivated wilderness the people of Kyoto called the Roji, the dewy path, which did far more work than any garden has a right to do. Later tonight, we will see why a man washes his hands at a stone basin set so low he has to bend almost double to reach it, and why that bend, that exact small humiliation, was the whole idea. Chapter 3, The Dewy Path, How the Garden Prepared the Guest. The guest's name is Jinbei, and he is sweating slightly inside a very good robe. He is a silk merchant, not a weaver like Kiku's father, but the next tier up. One of the men the weavers owe money to, a wholesaler of fine cloth, whose warehouse near the river holds bolts of silk worth more than some farmers will see in a lifetime. He is perhaps 50 years old, heavy-set, with the careful, soft-footed manner of a man who has spent his life being important in rooms where he is not allowed to act important. And he is, at this precise moment, standing at the outer gate of the Roji in the failing light, taking off his fine sandals and putting on a pair of plain ones the host has left for him, and feeling the first loosening of something he did not know was clenched. Picture his day up to this point, because the garden is about to undo it. Jinbei has spent the daylight hours doing what he does every day, calculating who owes him, whom he owes, which official needs flattering, which rival is overextended, how much a bolt of figured silk can fetch from a daimyo's household that wants to look richer than it is. He carries the whole ledger of the city in his head, and it does not switch off. It is running right now, quietly. Even as he ties the plain sandal, some back corner of his mind still pricing the silk of the host's spare robe, still wondering what tonight's invitation is really for. Because in his world, an invitation is always for something. That is the water he swims in. And then he steps onto the first stone of the Roji, and the calculating starts, very slightly, to falter. This is by design. The path is made of stepping stones set at irregular intervals, not evenly, the way a road is paved, but spaced so that you cannot simply stride down it. You have to look. You have to attend to where your foot goes next, and then the next. And the simple animal work of not stumbling in the dark quietly crowds the ledger out of the front of his mind. The host who laid these stones, or the host's father before him, knew exactly what he was doing, where we might put down a smooth, straight walk so a guest arrives quickly and unbothered. The tea masters did the opposite on purpose. They made the path a little difficult so that crossing it would take you out of your head and put you back into your body. Forget the idea of a garden as decoration. This garden is a machine for changing a state of mind, and it runs on nothing but moss, stone, and inconvenience. Halfway along the path, he comes to the thing the host most wanted him to come to, a low stone basin filled with clear water, a bamboo ladle laid across its mouth. This is the tsukubai, and the word itself means something like to crouch, because to use it, you must bend almost to a squat. Jinbei 50, heavy, a man who is bowed to all day lowers himself down, takes up the ladle, pours water over his left hand, then his right, then cups a little to rinse his mouth, then tips the ladle upright so the last of the water runs down the handle and washes the place his hands just touched. It is cold. It is summer. and the water has been sitting in stone, and it is shockingly cold against his fingers. And for just a moment, the cold is the only thing in the entire world. This too is the design. The bending humbles the body. The cold empties the mind. He is washing his hands. Yes, but the older idea underneath it is that he is washing off the day, the market, the ledger, the rank, the whole accumulated weight of being Jinbei the silk merchant, so that he can enter the room as something simpler and smaller, and for a few hours, free. Those who served in the military, or who remember the deliberate stripping down rituals of basic training, the shaved head, the identical uniform, the way the whole apparatus is built. To take the civilian out of a man before it builds, the soldier will recognize the mechanism, even though the purpose here is almost its opposite. The tea garden is not trying to break Jinbei down to rebuild him into something useful to a sergeant. It is trying to set him down, gently, the way you set down something heavy you have carried so long you forgot you were holding it. Same tool, opposite hands. The cold water, the awkward crouch, the dark, uneven path, every bit of it is engineered to do, to a 50-year-old merchant, what no amount of telling him to relax ever could. Notice the light in the garden, because it too was chosen with care. The stone lanterns set along the roji are not lit to illuminate the path, the way we would floodlight a walkway. There's barely enough flame in them to see by. Just a small, warm glow at intervals, enough to suggest the next few stones and no more. The darkness between the lanterns is not a failure of the lighting. It is the lighting. The tea masters understood, centuries before anyone wrote it down in those terms, that a little light in a great deal of dark is far more beautiful and far more calming than a lot of light everywhere, that the eye relaxes when it is not asked to take in everything at once. Jinbei moves from one small pool of glow to the next, and each step the garden asks him to trust the dark a little more, to let his eyes soften, to stop demanding that the world account for itself all at once. By the time he reaches the door, he is already, without knowing it, halfway into the frame of mind the room will ask of him. And listen to the garden, because sound is doing its quiet work as well. The city is just beyond the fence, the lanes, the late carts, the muffled life of a great capital. But the garden has been planted and walled to hold it at bay, so that what reaches Jinbei is not the city, but the small near sounds. The chirr of summer insects in the moss, the occasional drip of water from the bamboo ladle at the basin, the soft give of damp earth under his sandal, the far-off single note of a temple bell marking the hour. There may even be, somewhere in the garden, a device the tea gardeners loved, a length of bamboo that fills slowly with water from a trickling spout until it tips, empties, and falls back against a stone with a single hollow knock, then begins again, marking out the slow minutes with a sound like a patient heartbeat. Each of these sounds is small, and each one, in the held quiet, is enormous. The garden has not removed a sound. It has removed noise and left only the sounds worth hearing, and that distinction is the whole art of the place. Custom asks him to pause here, on the last stones before the door, and simply stand for a moment, not to hurry the final steps. A guest who understands the form does not rush the threshold. He lets the garden finish its work. So Jinbei stands in the dark, and the damp, and the insect song. A heavy-set, important man, alone in a small, wild-seeming garden in the middle of a great city. And he breathes. And the last of the ledger quietly closes itself in the back of his mind. Whatever he came here carrying, he is setting it down, stone by stone, exactly as the host intended. And only when he is ready, when the stillness has truly reached him, does he step onto the flat stone before the small, square door and kneel. And so he arrives at last at the door. We began with the Nijiriguchi, the crawling in entrance, that square of darkness barely 2 feet on a side. There is a flat stone to kneel on. There is a faint, warm light leaking around the edges of the wooden panel, and there is no dignified way through. Jinbei must kneel, slide the panel aside, put his head and shoulders through first, and work his way in on hands and knees, robe and all. We will sit with the strangeness of that in a moment, with the warlords and the swords and the whole upside-down logic of the most powerful people in Japan choosing to enter the holiest room they knew by crawling. But watch him do it first. Watch a heavy-set, dignified, important man fold himself down to the size of a child and disappear, rear first, into a glowing hole in a wall. Whatever else the tea ceremony is, it begins with that. It begins with everyone, no matter who they are, arriving on their knees. Inside, the master is waiting. We have not yet met him properly, and we should, because he is the still point. The whole evening turns around, and because his story, more than Kiku's and more than Jinbei's, holds the key to the question we started with. But notice, before we go to him, what Jinbei does the instant he is through the door and kneeling on the mats. He does not look at the host. He turns first to the alcove, the tokonoma, to look at the single scroll and the single flower the host has chosen for this one evening and will never repeat in quite this way again. He bows to them before he bows to the man. In a moment, we will understand why a hanging scroll and a stem of summer flower receive a guest's first and deepest attention, and why getting that wrong was, in this world, a graver insult than almost anything you could say aloud. Chapter 4. What the Guest Notices. The Room by Candlelight. Jinbei, kneeling now inside the room with the door slid shut behind him, does what every guest does in the first quiet minute. He lets his eyes adjust, and he reads the room. Not the way an architect reads a room. He cannot tell you the names of the joints or the proportions, but the way a man who has spent 40 years handling fine cloth reads a bolt of silk, which is to say with his whole body, instantly, before his thinking mind catches up. And the first thing his body tells him is that this room was built at enormous expense and trouble to look as though it cost almost nothing. That paradox, sitting in the very timber around him, is worth slowing down on, because it is the entire 17th century way of tea expressed in mud and wood. Take the walls. They are earthen plaster clay and sand and chopped straw, troweled on by hand and left rough, the straw fibers still showing in the surface, like the grain in a piece of bread. To an untrained eye, this looks like the wall of a poor farmer's hut, and that resemblance is entirely deliberate. But the clay was chosen for its color, dug from a particular place, aged, mixed to a particular recipe, and applied by a plasterer who was, in his own quiet trade, an artist with a long apprenticeship behind him. The roughness is not neglect. It is roughness achieved, roughness that took skill to make look effortless. The same is true of the corner post. Jinbei's shoulder is near a length of wood left with its natural, slightly irregular shape, even its bark edge in places, rather than squared and planed smooth. In the Lord's reception hall, every timber was milled straight and polished. Here, the wood is allowed to look like wood, and finding exactly the right crooked, characterful post, and setting it just so, costs more thought and often more money than a flawless straight one ever would. He looks up. The ceiling is low enough that a tall man would stoop, low enough to make the little room feel like a held breath, and it is made of nothing grander than split bamboo and woven reed, lashed with cord, the kind of material a fisherman might roof a shed with. In daylight, there is a single small window, set low, latticed in wood and backed with white paper that turns the harsh sun into a soft, even, papery glow. Tonight the window is a dark square, doing nothing, because tonight the light is the candle. But Junbei has sat in this room by day, years ago, and he remembers how that paper-filtered light felt gentle, directionless, flattering to the rough walls, the kind of light that makes everything look like it is remembering itself. The whole little structure is a study in what the builders called the spirit of the hermit's hut, the deliberate poverty of a mountain recluse, reproduced at the heart of a great city by people who could have built anything, precisely because they had decided that this, the small, the plain, the humble, was the higher thing. Under his knees is the tatami, those mats of tightly woven rice straw that gave the room its very unit of measure. A tea room is not described in feet, but in mats. This is a 4.5 mat room, and that half mat, set in the center, is its own small world, the place where the host kneels and the fire burns and the tea is made. The mats are firm and slightly springy, cool against the shin through the thin summer robe, and they carry a faint, clean smell of dried grass that deepens when they are warm. Every measurement of the room flows from them, and every movement too. A host learns to cross a room in a fixed number of steps per mat, to turn at the seams, so that even walking becomes a kind of counted, knowable thing. Those who have lived aboard ship, where every inch is measured and every locker has its purpose, and a man learns the exact geography of a small space until he can move through it in the dark, will understand the feeling of a room where nothing is arbitrary and everything has its place. The tea room is a small vessel, and the rules of moving through it are its seamanship. And here is the strange, soft thing the room does to him, the thing he has felt before and forgotten and is feeling again now. Because the space is so small and so plain and so completely without anything to impress or distract him. No view, no ornament, no scale, no display of wealth to measure himself against. There is, very quickly, nothing for his restless, competitive mind to do. In Junbei's world, every room is a contest. The size of it, the quality of its appointments, who sits where, all of it is information, all of it is ranking, and his eyes have spent 50 years sweeping rooms for advantage, the way a sentry sweeps a tree line. This room defeats that habit completely. It offers him nothing to win. And in the small defeat of having nothing to win, something in his chest, for the second time tonight, lets go. He stops scanning. His eyes come to rest, at last, on the one thing left to look at, the still, patient, unhurried figure of the host, kneeling in the shadow beyond the candle, waiting, as he has been waiting this whole time for his guest to finish arriving. Chapter 5. The Master in the Alcove, reading a scroll and a single flower. The Master's name is Soetsu, and he's been kneeling without moving for a long time. He's past 60 now, lean as a winter branch, with a face that has folded itself into deep, calm lines, and a pair of hands that have done this same set of movements so many tens of thousands of times that they no longer feel like effort. He is, in the wider world, a man of some importance, a teacher of tea, sought out by samurai and merchants alike, the holder of a lineage that runs back, teacher to student, to the great masters of the previous century. But none of that shows. He has arranged himself so that nothing shows. He wears a plain, dark robe of very good cloth and no ornament whatsoever. And he has put himself in the lowest, simplest posture a human body can hold. And he waits for his guest with the patience of a stone that has watched 1,000 of these evenings come and go. Now, about that alcove, and why Jinbei bowed to it first. The tokonoma is the one place in the bare little room where the host is permitted to speak, not with words, but with objects. On the wall hangs a scroll tonight, a few spare strokes of ink that suggest, without quite spelling out, a line of old poetry about the brevity of a summer night. Beneath it, in a plain bamboo vase, stands one white flower, cut this afternoon, still carrying a single bead of water on a leaf. That is the entire statement. And to a guest who knows how to read it, and Jinbei, for all his ledgers, has been schooled to read it, the scroll and the flower together are the host's way of saying something he could never say directly. They set the mood. They name the season. They make, in two objects, a small argument about how to feel about the fact that the evening, like the summer, like the guest himself, will not last. There is a courtesy in this that runs deeper than manners. By bowing to the alcove before he greets the host, Jinbei is acknowledging the thought the host put into the room, telling him, without a word, "I see what you've done here, and I receive it." To barge past the scroll and start chatting would be like sitting down at a friend's carefully set holiday table and reaching for your phone. The objects were chosen for you. The least you can do is look. And in a culture where so much went unsaid, where rank and obligation pressed on every spoken sentence, this silent grammar of objects and bows let two men say true things to each other that the daylight world gave them no safe way to say. We will see later tonight how much can pass between two people who are barely speaking. For now, it is enough to know that the room has already begun to talk. Before there is tea, there is fire, and the laying of the fire is itself a small ceremony called the sumitamai, the charcoal procedure. You might think arranging charcoal is the sort of thing one does quickly and out of sight, the way we would never dream of making guests watch us preheat an oven. Suetsu does the opposite. He brings the charcoal in on a special tray, lifts the kettle aside, sweeps the ash into a particular damp pattern with a feather, and lays each piece of charcoal in a specific place in a specific order. The larger pieces first, the smaller wedged to catch and carry the flame. He moves the white ash around the edges with the care of a man banking snow. It takes time. It is meant to take time. Jinbei watches every motion, and in watching, he learns the shape of the evening's heart, that the fire will be ready when it is ready, that the water will boil in its own time, and that nothing tonight is going to be hurried, including him. When the charcoal is laid, the master places a sliver of fragrant wood among the coals, a precious aromatic, the kind of thing that came by ship from far to the south and cost, ounce for ounce, a small fortune. It catches the heat and releases a thin thread of scent into the little room, something between sandalwood and old temple and rain on warm stone. Now consider what the host has just done with the senses of his guest. He has given his eyes the scroll and the flower. He has given his ears the small, dry clicks of the charcoal tongs and the first faint song of the kettle beginning to warm. And now he gives his nose this single quiet note of incense. One thing at a time, each in its turn, none of them loud. The room is not trying to overwhelm Jinbei. It is trying, very deliberately, to wake up one sense at a time, the parts of him that the noisy daylight had put to sleep. Meanwhile, 3 steps away in the water room, Kiku is plating the meal. Because here is something most people do not know about a proper tea gathering. The famous bowl of whisked green tea comes near the end. Before it, the host serves a meal, the kaiseki, and in the early 17th century, this meal was not yet the elaborate parade of courses it would later become. It was deliberately frugal. A bowl of rice, a bowl of clear soup, a piece of fish, or a few simmered vegetables, whatever the season honestly offered. The idea, handed down from the old masters, was that the food should be just enough to settle the stomach, so that the tea, when it came, would land cleanly and not one bite more. To serve a lavish spread would have been to miss the entire point. Those who lived through the lean years, who learned to make a fine meal out of very little and to call it sufficient, would have understood this kitchen completely. Abundance was easy. The hard thing, the refined thing, was knowing exactly how little was enough. So Kiku carries the tray to the edge of the room and sets it down at the threshold, and the master takes it from there. And Jinbei never sees her, and that is correct. And it stings her a little anyway, in a place she has mostly stopped noticing. The meal passes slowly and almost wordlessly. There is a small cup of warmed rice wine. There is a moment when Jinbei tastes the soup, that his eyes close for just a breath. The broth is exactly seasoned, the kind of clear, deep, simple flavor that takes far more skill than any rich sauce, and he knows enough to know it. He does not know it was Kiku who made it. He assumes, the way guests always assume, that the master's hands touched everything. We will return to that assumption later, because by the end of the night it is going to matter more than Jinbei could possibly guess. Let us linger on this meal a moment, because the order of it is its own quiet teaching. It begins, as a proper kaiseki does, with the 3 foundations set before the guests together. A small mound of rice, deliberately served when it is barely done and at its sweetest, a bowl of clear soup, and a single dish of something seasonal, simple, honestly prepared. There is a logic to serving the rice young and the portions small. The host is not trying to fill his guest, but to prepare him. To give the stomach just enough that the strong tea will not later turn it. Course follows course at an unhurried pace, each one small, each one keyed to the season. A little simmered dish, a morsel of grilled fish, a pickled vegetable sharp enough to wake the palate. Nothing is rich. Nothing is showy. A man expecting a banquet would leave hungry and offended. A man who understands leaves exactly satisfied, which is a harder and rarer thing to engineer than abundance, and which Kiku has engineered, course by course, from behind her wall. There's a little warmed rice wine poured by the host's own hand into a shallow cup, and offered and received with the small bows that govern such things, the host pouring for the guest, at the right moment, returning the courtesy. It is not enough to cloud the head, only enough to loosen it, to warm the chest and soften the talk. And here the evening's strict formality relaxes by a degree or two, the way a held breath eases. The 2 men exchange a few unhurried words about the heat of the day, the lateness of the season, the rice. Nothing of consequence is said, and that is precisely the point. The conversation of the meal is meant to be easy and undemanding, a warming up of the voice before the deeper silence of the tea. Those who remember a certain kind of older hospitality, where a guest was fed simply but exactly, where the host poured your drink himself and would not hear of you doing it, where the talk over the table was gentle and unhurried, and no one reach for a distraction will recognize the spirit of this completely. It is the hospitality of full attention, and it has never gone out of style, only out of fashion. And then, at the close of the meal and before the guest withdraws, comes the sweet. And the sweet is not an indulgence, but a piece of strategy. The tea that will follow, the thick koicha, is intensely bitter, and the confection served now is meant to coat the palate with sweetness in advance, so that the bitter, when it arrives, lands as depth rather than shock. The sweet is also, in its own miniature way, a poem about the season. The confectioners of Kyoto, and that this was its own refined craft, with its own masters shaped these small, soft sweets to suggest, never to copy, the time of year. A curve of pale color to hint at a summer stream, a translucence to suggest cool water, a shape that calls a particular flower to mind without ever quite being it. Jinbei eats his in 2 small bites and tastes beneath the sweetness the whole of the late summer the host has been quietly evoking all evening, the heat, the brevity, the nearness of the turn toward autumn. Even the candy in this room is part of the argument. Then he sets down the dish and bows and prepares to withdraw to the garden for the interval, the first half of the evening complete. That withdrawal is itself part of the design, not an afterthought. By long custom, the guest goes back out through the little door into the garden to stretch his legs and sit on a simple bench in the dark, while the host resets the room for the main event. This interval has a lovely old name, the Nakadachi, the middle leaving, and it divides the gathering cleanly in 2. The first half, with its meal and its firelight and its easy settling in, and the second half, the still, formal heart of the whole thing, the making and drinking of the thick tea. Jinbei steps out into the garden. The night has come down fully now. Somewhere a bell sounds from a temple, very far off. And while he sits there in the cool dark, letting the meal settle, the room behind him is being silently transformed. And the transformation is largely Kiku's doing, though he will never know it. There is a tease I owe you here, and I will keep it. When Jinbei crawls back in, the alcove will have changed, and what replaces the scroll is going to tell us almost everything about why this evening exists at all. While he sits, let us use the quiet to understand the man who built all this, not Soetsu himself, but the master Soetsu learned from, and the one before that, back to the figure whose long shadow falls across every tea room in Japan. Because Jinbei is not sitting on that bench by accident, and the door is not small by accident, and the tea is not bitter by accident. Every one of these choices was an argument, made by real people, often at real cost, about how a human being ought to live. Remember the question we opened with: why the powerful chose to crawl? Why the wealthy chose the dark? The man who turned those choices into a way of life paid for them with his life. We are getting closer to that story, but Jinbei is rising from the bench, and the host has signaled that the room is ready, and we should be inside for what comes next. Chapter 6, From Zen Monks to the Way of Tea, How Tea Came to Japan. Soetsu, kneeling in his small dark room in 1640, is the inheritor of a chain of teachers that runs back 4 centuries, and while the kettle warms, it is worth following that chain back to its beginning, because the calm, austere thing Jinbei is being given tonight did not begin as art at all. It began as medicine, and then as a tool for staying awake. To understand how a bowl of bitter green powder became the center of a refined way of living, we have to go back to the cold halls of the Zen monasteries, long before Rikyu, long before anyone thought to call any of this a way. Tea had been drunk in China for many centuries, and it had reached Japan more than once in earlier ages, but it never quite took root until a monk named Aisai brought it back in earnest at the very end of the 12th century. Aisai had gone to China to study Zen Buddhism, and he came home with two things that would change his country: the meditation school that would shape its warriors and its art for the next 800 years, and the seeds in the powdered tea method that would grow into everything in this room. He is said to have written a treatise praising tea as a medicine good for the heart, good for long life, and to have planted seeds that spread, temple by temple, through the mountains around the capital. For the monks, tea had a very practical use. First of all, it kept you awake. A man trying to sit in motionless meditation through the long, cold hours before dawn has a powerful enemy in his own drowsiness, and a bowl of strong green tea was the weapon against it. The first thing tea did in Japan was hold a tired man's eyes open while he searched for enlightenment. From the monasteries, tea climbed the social ladder, and as it climbed, it became something almost unrecognizable to the austere monks who had first prized it. By the 14th and 15th centuries, among the warrior aristocracy, tea had become a vehicle for spectacular display. The fashionable thing was the lavish tea gathering, where wealthy hosts showed off their collections of precious, imported objects from china celadon bowls, ink paintings, bronze vases, the rarer the better, in rooms designed to dazzle. There were even raucous tea-tasting contests, a kind of gambling game, where guests drank bowl after bowl and wagered on whether they could tell which mountain's tea they were tasting, with extravagant prizes for the winners. Picture the difference. The monk drank one bitter bowl in a cold hall to stay awake for God. The warlord drank dozens in a gilded room surrounded by treasures to win a bet and impress his rivals. Tea had gone, in 2 centuries, from a discipline to a luxury, from a medicine to a status symbol. And that is the world into which the great reformers were about to be born. A world where tea meant showing off. The turn came from a handful of men who looked at all that glittering display and found it hollow. The first whose name we remember was Murata Juko, a figure half historical and half legendary, often called the father of Wabi tea, who in the late 15th century began to argue for a smaller, plainer, more spiritual gathering, fewer treasures, a humbler room, a return to the contemplative roots the monks had known. He is said to have prized a plain, quiet harmony over dazzling, imported perfection, and to have brought the spirit of Zen back into a practice that had drifted into mere showing off. A generation or so later, a wealthy merchant of the port city of Sakai, named Takenoju, carried the idea further, deliberately choosing humble, everyday Japanese objects over precious Chinese ones, and shrinking the room and the spirit toward the plain and the spare. And it was Takenoju who taught the young man who would become the greatest of them all, the man kneeling in the previous century's hut in the image we are about to return to. The reform of tea was, in other words, a relay. Each master handed the idea of simplicity to the next, and each one made it simpler, until it reached the hands that would make it permanent. None of which Soetsu is consciously thinking about, of course, as he waits for his water to reach the right voice. But it is the reason he is kneeling in a room the size of a hermit's hut, rather than a hall full of treasures. The reason the bowl beside him is a humble local one, rather than a flawless Chinese import. the reason the whole evening is built on subtraction rather than addition. He is the far end of a 400-year argument about what tea is for, and the argument, in his hands, has come to rest on the side of the monks who started it. That the point was never the treasures, and never the bet, and never the show. The point was the bowl, and the quiet, and the staying awake not for God, now exactly, but awake to the single passing evening, which may amount in the end to nearly the same thing. And the man who turned that argument from a fashion into a faith and paid for it with his life is the one we meet next. Chapter 7. Why the Powerful Chose to Crawl. The Master Who Paid with His Life. Suetsu's grandmother, when he was a boy learning to hold a whisk, used to speak of the great master the way some families speak of a saint or a grandfather. Everyone reveres, but no one quite met, and that is a long way of saying that the way of tea, jinbei, is being welcomed into tonight, did not fall from the sky. It was made, deliberately, and at great human cost, by a handful of men in the previous century, and one above all. To understand why a silk merchant is sitting in the dark, on a garden bench, waiting to crawl through a tiny door, we have to step back about 50 years, to the man who decided the door should be tiny in the first place. His name has come down to us as Sen no Rikyu, and he is, without much competition, the most important figure in the entire history of Japanese tea. Rikyu lived in a violent age, the closing decades of nearly a century of civil war, when warlords burned each other's castles and the country was being hammered by blood and fire into a single unified state. He served as tea master to the two most powerful men of that age, and especially to the second of them, the great unifier Toyotomi Hideyoshi, a peasant's son who clawed his way to rule the entire country. And here is the strange, almost unbelievable fact at the center of it. In an age of swords and armies, a man whose only weapon was a tea whisk became one of the most influential people in Japan. Hideyoshi built a tea room lined entirely in gold walls, ceiling, utensils, all of it gold because that was Hideyoshi's nature, to make power visible, to overwhelm. And Rikyu, his own tea master, spent his life quietly arguing for the exact opposite. It was Rikyu who shrank the tea room down to 2 mats, who roughened its walls, who threw out the imported Chinese treasures other men prized and replaced them with humble local bowls, bamboo scoops he cut himself, flowers in a fisherman's basket. And it was Rikyu, by long tradition, who is credited with the crawl-in door, the Nijiraguchi, the story, which may be polished smooth by a retelling, but points at a real truth, is that he took the idea from the low sliding hatch on a riverboat he saw fishermen ducking through. He made the door small on purpose. He made it so small that no one, not the grandest lord, not the proudest general, could enter without bowing his head and bending his back. And critically, he made it so small that a samurai could not pass through wearing his longsword. The blade had to come off and be left outside, on a rack by the door, beside everyone else's. Sit with what that means, because it is the answer to the first half of our opening question, and it is more radical than it looks. In a society organized from top to bottom around rank, where what you could wear, where you could sit, whom you bowed to, and how deeply, were all fixed by your birth and station, Rikyu built a room you could only enter by physically lowering yourself, and into which you could not bring the swords that marked you as a warrior. Inside that room, for the length of the gathering, the ferocious hierarchy of the outside world was meant to be suspended. A great lord and a humble merchant knelt on the same mats, drank from the same bowl, and were, for those few hours, simply guests at a fire. The crawl was not a humiliation. It was an equalizer. Everyone arrived the same way, bent low, unarmed, on their knees, because the room was making a quiet, dangerous argument that under the silk and the swords, that was how everyone arrived in the world anyway. This was in its way an idea with a blade in it, and it cost Rikyu everything. In the year 1591, after years of service, Hideyoshi, the all-powerful ruler, the man of the gold tea room, turned on his tea master and ordered him to take his own life. Historians still argue about exactly why. Some say it was a quarrel over a statue. Some say Rikyu refused to let the ruler take his daughter. Some say it was simply that a peasant-born tyrant could not, in the end, tolerate a subject whose authority over taste and beauty he could not buy or command. The reality was almost certainly tangled, a knot of pride and politics we cannot fully untie at this distance. But the ending is not in doubt. The most celebrated man of taste in Japan, ordered to die, is said to have held one last tea gathering for his closest students, served them calmly, gave away his utensils one by one as keepsakes, and then, composed to the end, took up a short blade and ended his own life. He was 70 years old. What he could not be made to do was pretend that power and beauty were the same thing. And every small, dark tea room built in the 50 years since, including the one Jinbei is about to re-enter, is in some sense a monument to a man who died rather than make that lie. It is worth holding side by side the two rooms that this whole tradition was a quarrel between, because the contrast is the entire argument in a single image. On the one hand, Hideyoshi's famous golden tea room walls and ceiling and pillars, and even the utensils sheathed in gold leaf, a chamber so opulent it could be packed up and carried to impress an emperor, a room that said, with every blinding surface, "Look how much I have. Look how high I have risen. Look upon my power and be small." And on the other hand, Rikyu's too-mat hut of mud and straw and crooked wood, lit by one window, holding one flower, a room that said the exact opposite. Look how little a person truly needs. Look how much can be found in plainness. Set down your power at the door and be, for once, simply human. The astonishing thing is that these two rooms belonged to the same two men, the ruler and his tea master, and that for a time they coexisted. The gold and the mud, the display and the renunciation, each an argument the other could not win. Hideyoshi could command armies and build in gold. What he could not do was make the mud hut stop being more beautiful and more true. And that, in the end, may be as close as we will ever come to understanding why he had to destroy the man who built it. And the verdict of history, on this one narrow question at least, is not in doubt. The mud hut won. The gold tea room is a curiosity, a story we tell to illustrate the excess of a particular ruler. But the small, dark room of earth and straw became the enduring ideal, copied and refined and handed down for the next 4 centuries, until it shaped not just tea, but Japanese architecture, gardens, poetry, the very sense of what beauty is. Rikyu lost his life. His idea outlived every army Hideyoshi ever raised. There is a lesson in that which the generation watching tonight, who have seen empires rise and fall and seen which things actually last, may appreciate more keenly than most, that the loudest power in any room is rarely the one that endures, and that a quiet, true thing, held to at real cost, can outlast all the gold in the world. The hut beat the palace. It usually does, in the end, if you wait long enough. Jinbei rises from the garden bench, carrying, though he cannot say it in these words, the whole weight of that victory. Jinbei knows this story. Every educated person of his time knew it, the way an American of a certain generation knows the broad shape of Valley Forge or the landing at Normandy without having to look it up, a piece of shared inheritance, half history and half something closer to scripture. And so when he hears the soft signal that the room is ready and rises from the bench and walks back across the dark stones and kneels once more at that tiny door, he is not merely being put through an inconvenient ritual. He is stepping, knowingly, into a tradition that someone died to protect. He bends his head. He puts his hands on the mat. And for the second time tonight, a wealthy and important man crawls willingly into the dark, and this time he understands exactly why the door is small. Inside, the room has indeed changed. There's the teas I promised. Paid. The scroll is gone from the alcove. In its place hangs a single flower, and only the flower. This is the old logic of the gathering made visible. In the first half, while the guest's mind was still busy, the host gave him words to read, a poem to settle into. Now, in the second half, with the mind quieted by the garden and the dark, words would only be clutter. The flower is enough. It is, if you like, the host saying, we are past the part where we needed language. Jinbei takes his place. The kettle is singing now, a low sound the old tea writers compared to wind in distant pines. And Soetsu reaches to his waist and draws out a folded square of silk. In the true heart of the evening, the part everything else has been preparing, finally begins. Chapter 8. The Folding of the Silk. The Choreography of Purification. The square of silk is called the fukusa, and watching a master handle it is like watching a very old, very slow dance whose every step means something. It is not large, about the size of a folded handkerchief, and it is dyed a single deep, quiet color. Its only job, in plain terms, is to wipe the tea caddy and the scoop clean. But the way Soetsu folds it turns that plain job into something closer to a meditation. He runs it through his fingers, folding and refolding along precise lines, snapping it once with a soft, dry sound to settle the weave, inspecting each edge. There is a name for this whole sequence, fukusa sabaki, the handling of the silk, and a young student can spend literally years learning to do it so that it looks like nothing, like it simply happened, the way Jinbei's eye now tells him it is simply happening. Now, you might reasonably ask, and Jinbei, years ago, when he first studied tea, asked his own teacher exactly this: why bother? The caddy is already clean. Kiku wiped it twice in the water room. The scoop has not touched anything dirty, so why this elaborate ceremonial cleaning of things that are not soiled? And the answer his teacher gave him is the answer that unlocks the whole practice. You are not cleaning the object. You are cleaning your attention. The point of wiping a clean caddy slowly and perfectly is that to do it slowly and perfectly, you must be entirely present. Your mind cannot be on the silk market, or the rival across the river, or the ache in your knees, or anything at all, except this fold, this edge, this surface, right now. The purification is real, but the thing being purified is the person doing it. Those who have done truly skilled handwork, who have stripped and reassembled a rifle until the hands knew it in the dark, who have turned a piece of wood on a lathe, who have sewn a seam that had to be invisible, who have done any task so many times that thinking about it only gets in the way, will know this state from the inside. There is a particular peace in it, a quiet that the mind cannot argue its way into, but the hands can lead it to. The tea masters did not discover this peace, but they may have been the first to build an entire art form around chasing it on purpose, every evening, with a clean cloth and an already clean cup. Jinbei feels his own breathing slow to match the rhythm of the silk. He could not have told you the moment it happened. That too is the point. Before any tea is made, the master also examines and warms the whisk, dipping it into a bowl of hot water and turning it slowly, checking each fine tine, softening the bamboo so it will not snap against the bowl, and so any stray fiber will show itself now rather than later in the guest's tea. This too is done in full view, unhurried, and this too is part of the long ledger of small attentions the guest is being shown. Every implement in the room has been cleaned twice, once invisibly by Kiku in the water room, and once again, visibly, ceremonially, by the master in front of his guest. The second cleaning is not for hygiene. The first one handled that. The second cleaning is for the guest, a way of saying, "Watch how carefully I prepare what I am about to give you. There is no part of this I will do carelessly, and no part I will hide. Consider the scoop at itself, the chashaku, for it is the humblest object in the room, and in some ways the most beloved. It is nothing but a thin sliver of bamboo, a few inches long, gently curved at the end to lift the powder, with a single small node left in the middle for the eye to rest on. A master might cut his own from a length of bamboo, shaping it with a small knife and a steady hand over a fire, and the finished scoop would carry the faint marks of its making and often a name given to it by its maker, the way you might name a small boat or a beloved tool after a line of poetry or a quality it seemed to possess. A celebrated old scoop, cut by a famous hand, could be treasured beyond all proportion to the scrap of bamboo it physically was. There is something deeply moving in that. A civilization that took the cheapest, most disposable material, it had bamboo, which grows like a weed, and through nothing but attention and skill and love, made of it an object worth cherishing for centuries. If you have ever owned a plain tool that became precious only because of whose hands made it or used it, a father's pocket knife, a worn fountain pen, a kitchen spoon older than you are, then you already understand the chashaku, and you understand it better than any explanation can give you. When the caddy is opened, there is the first real color of the night. Against all the muted browns and blacks and the honey of the candle, the powdered tea inside is a startling, deep, living green, the color of moss in deep shade, of new pine, of something almost too vivid for the dim room to hold. This is matcha, and in the 17th century, it was a genuine luxury. The tender spring leaves of shaded tea plants, steamed and dried and then ground, slowly, between two heavy stone wheels, into a powder finer than flour. We will spend some time soon on where this green powder came from and why grinding it was its own small monument of patient labor. There's a person at the far end of this story, turning a stone wheel by hand in the cold, whom Jinbei will never meet and never think about. For now, the master takes up the bamboo scoop and lifts out a measure of the green, and the room holds its breath, because the moment everything has been moving toward is here. Chapter 9. The Resonance of the Whisk, Making and Sharing the Thick Tea. The tea being made now is koicha, thick tea, and it is not the frothy, bright drink most people picture when they imagine matcha. It is the older, more solemn form, much more powder, much less water, whisked not into a foam, but into a smooth, glossy, almost paint-like consistency, dark green and dense, closer to a warm liquid silk than to a beverage. Soetsu measures out scoop after scoop, far more than seems reasonable, 3 times what he would use for the lighter tea, and mounds it in the bottom of the bowl. The thick tea is the formal center of the gathering, the most concentrated, the most serious. And crucially, on an evening like this one, it is shared, one bowl, made once, passed from hand to hand. He lifts the long bamboo ladle, dips it into the singing kettle, and pours a small, careful measure of hot, not boiling, hot water over the green. And here the acoustics of the little room come alive. With the world sealed out behind the heavy door, with no other sound competing, you can hear everything. The soft glug of the water leaving the ladle, the faint hiss as it meets the warm powder, the deeper note of the kettle settling. The old masters listened to their kettles the way a sailor listens to wind, and they prized kettles cast so that the water moving inside them and the small bits of iron set in the bottom would sing in a particular low register. Some kettles were valued as much for their voice as for their iron. In a room this quiet, sound becomes a kind of furniture. It fills the dark the way the candlelight cannot. Then comes the whisk the chasen, cut from a single piece of bamboo, its ends split into many fine tines, so delicate they look like the legs of some pale insect, and so fragile that it is, by design, nearly disposable. A serious practitioner might retire one after a season, but for thick tea, the master does not whisk briskly. He kneads. The motion is slow and folding, working the powder and water together until there are no lumps, no dry pockets, until the whole becomes one smooth, heavy, gleaming mass. It can take a minute or more of patient, even pressure. Whisk too fast and you get froth and bitterness. Too slow and it never marries. The hand has to know the exact middle way, and Soetsu's hand has known it for 40 years. The smell rises now into the room, vegetal, deep, faintly sweet and faintly bitter all at once. The smell of spring leaves and stone and steam, unlike anything else on earth. While the master works, the kettle has been keeping up its low conversation, and it is worth understanding what he is listening for, because the temperature of the water is everything, and he has no thermometer but his ears. As water heats toward the boil, it passes through stages a practiced person can hear. First, a faint sighing, then a sound the old writers compared to the wind moving through a stand of pines, then the deeper rolling murmur of a true boil. For thick tea, the master does not want a furious boil that would scald the tender powder and turn it harsh and bitter. He wants the water just off the boil, hot but not raging, and he judges that moment by the kettle's voice and by the feel of the steam, the way a blacksmith reads the color of iron, or a cook knows by the smell alone that the bread is done. There is a whole vanished literacy in this, a way of knowing the world through patient attention to its small signals, that an age of dials and digital readouts has very nearly forgotten. The master never forgot it. He cannot afford to. The kettle is his only instrument, and he has spent a lifetime learning to read it. And here's a small thing that tells you how completely the way of tea is keyed to the turning year. Because it is summer, the master is heating his water on a portable brazier set out on the mats, placed a little away from where the guest kneels. In the cold months, he would not use the brazier at all. He would use a sunken hearth, cut into the floor, the row, set closer to the guest so that its warmth could be shared and its fire seen. The whole arrangement of the room shifts with the seasons, the fire moves nearer in winter to comfort, and farther in summer to spare the guest its heat. This is not a trivial detail of furniture. It is the way of tea's deepest principle made physical, that the host arranges everything, down to the placement of the fire, around the comfort and the season of the guest. In the depth of winter, the host pulls the warmth close, like an arm around a cold shoulder. In the heat of summer, he sets it respectfully aside and finds other ways a wider bowl, a suggestion of coolness, the sound of water to bring relief. The same ceremony, performed in January and in July, is two different acts of care. Tonight it is July, and so the fire keeps its distance, and the room is arranged in a dozen invisible ways around the simple wish that a man should not be too warm. There is even a vessel of fresh cold water in the room, the Mizusashi, standing by with its wooden lid, and in summer the master may use it pointedly, lifting the lid so the guest catches the look and the small sound of cool water, a deliberate suggestion of coolness offered to the eye and ear in the heat. In a wider, more spacious summer room than this little one, the host might leave a door open to a glimpse of green garden, or arrange a single dewed leaf, all to whisper the same word. Cool, cool, be cool. These are not accidents, and they are not mere prettiness. They are a host thinking, hours in advance, about exactly how his guest's body will feel in the room, and bending every small choice toward that feeling. We have a tendency to imagine old formalities as cold and rigid things, all rules and no warmth. The truth of this room is the opposite. Every rule in it exists in service of a single warm intention, that the guest, for the length of the evening, should want for nothing, should feel cared for in ways too numerous and too quiet to consciously notice. The formality is not the opposite of the warmth. The formality is how the warmth is delivered, reliably, every time without having to be spoken. So when the master finally eases the whisk through its last slow folds and the thick tea comes together, smooth, glossy, dense, holding its surface like warm paint, every one of these considerations has already been silently spent on it. The water judged by ear to the exact heat, the fire set at its respectful summer distance, the coolness suggested to a sweating guest, the powder ground by hands far away and measured out with a name scoop, the bowl cleaned twice and chosen for this one night. The finished bowl is the visible tip of an enormous, invisible labor of attention. And the master, who has done all of this 10,000 times, sets down the whisk and looks for one moment at what he has made, the way any craftsman looks at good work, before he lifts the bowl to give it away. And here, watching him reach for the bowl, is the place to name the thing that has been quietly astonishing Jinbei all evening, the quality that separates a true master from a competent practitioner, the economy of his motion. The master never makes an unnecessary movement and never makes a necessary one in a hurried or wasteful way. His hand goes to the ladle and to the bowl and to the silk by the shortest, calmest path, with no flourish, no fidget, no extra gesture to fill the silence or impress the eye. Where a younger man would have a dozen small, superfluous motions, a needless adjustment, a second look, a hand brought up and put down again, the master has none. Everything he does once, and exactly. It is the same spare grace you see in a master carpenter who drives a nail in one swing, in a surgeon whose hands never tremble or backtrack, in any old hand, at any demanding craft who has boiled a lifetime of practice down to pure, unwasted competence. The tea masters had a phrase for the goal of it, that the host should move as if there were nothing in his mind at all. No anxiety, no showing off, no effort, only the next motion arising of itself. It looks, to Jinbei, like the easiest thing in the world. He knows, because he tried to learn it once and failed, that it is among the hardest. 40 years stand behind the ease of that single reach, and the 40 years are precisely what you are not supposed to see. When it is ready, Soetsu sets the bowl down on the mat and rotates it 2 small, precise turns so that its front, the most beautiful face of the bowl, is presented toward his guest. This is the host's gesture of respect. I give you the best side. Jinbei bows, takes the bowl up with both hands, and now does the answering half of the courtesy. He turns the bowl back, the other way, 2 turns, so that his own lips will not touch that beautiful front, so that he does not presume to drink from the face the host honored him with. The whole exchange takes only a few seconds, and not a word is spoken, and in it, the 2 men say to each other, clearly and completely, I respect you, and I will not take more than is offered. There are marriages that never manage to say as much. Watch the small choreography of the drinking, because it is dense with meaning that passes in a few seconds, and almost none of it is left to chance. The number of sips is, by tradition, a settled thing, neither a hurried gulp nor an idle lingering, but a measured few. On a night with several guests, the first to drink might offer a quiet word of apology to those who will drink after him, a small acknowledgement of the shared vessel and of the privilege of going first. And on the final sip there is, by old custom, a soft, deliberate draw of breath at the very end, a sound that would be the height of rudeness at any other table. And here's a courtesy, a way of telling the host without words that the bowl has been finished and enjoyed down to its last. Every motion is fixed, and yet none of it feels mechanical, because each fixed motion carries a feeling: respect, restraint, gratitude, attention. The form is the feeling, made reliable. A man could perform these exact gestures every day of his life and never once exhaust what they are for. He drinks. The thick tea is intense bitter, yes, but a rounded, almost savory bitterness, thick on the tongue, warming all the way down, with a sweetness that arrives only afterward, like a thought you have on the way home. He takes a measured sip, then another, then wipes the rim clean with a small folded paper he carries, and turns the bowl, and passes it on, this small night, to no one else. But on a fuller night it would go next to the second guest, and the third, each drinking from the same bowl, each wiping the rim, the single vessel binding the whole company into one circle. To share a bowl like this, in an age riddled with plague and rank and suspicion, was an act of trust, with a long meaning behind it. You drank where the Lord's lips had been, and the Lord drank where yours had been, and the bowl did not care which of you owned more silk. Chapter 10. Why the Room is Dark. The mystery answered. Remember, at the very beginning, the second mystery, the one I told you to hold on to? Not why the powerful crawled, which we have answered, but the stranger, quieter puzzle. Why a man rich enough to light the room with a dozen lamps chooses instead a single candle. Why the host went to such trouble to keep the most important moment of the night happening in light, so low you can barely see the color of the tea. Here's the answer, and it is sitting right now in the bowl cupped in Jinbei's 2 hands, a bowl so dim he cannot quite make out the green of what he is drinking. The room is dark because the dark is doing the same work the garden did, only deeper. In bright light, Jinbei would see everything at once: the bowl, the walls, the host's face, the small imperfections, the whole busy surface of the world. And seeing everything, he would judge it, price it, sort it, the way his eyes have sorted and priced things all his life. The dark takes that away. It narrows the world down to what the single candle allows: a pair of warm hands, the heat of the bowl, the smell of the tea, the low voice of the kettle, the rim against his lip. He cannot see the green, so he tastes it more. He cannot read the host's expression, so he feels the man's presence instead. The darkness is not a hardship the host failed to fix. It is a gift the host paid for. By giving Jinbei less to see, he has given him more to feel. And in the dark, with almost nothing to look at, a 50-year-old merchant who has spent his whole life calculating fines for a few minutes, that there is nothing left to calculate. There is only the warmth in his hands and the quiet in the room. That is what the dark was for. That was always what it was for. And now there is a silence, and it is worth describing what kind of silence it is, because it is not the awkward silence of two people who have run out of things to say. It is a full silence, a worked-for silence, the kind that has weight and texture, and that both men are, in their different ways, savoring. In it, Jinbei can hear the small remaining sounds, the way you hear your own heartbeat when a noisy machine finally shuts off. The faint, settling tick of the cooling kettle, the almost inaudible hiss of the candle, the soft sound of the master's robe as he breathes, the distant once-an-hour note of a temple bell carried over the rooftops. He has not sat in a silence like this in years, perhaps decades. His life is built to prevent it. There is always a ledger, a customer, a worry, a calculation murmuring in the back of his skull. Here, for these few minutes, the murmur has stopped, and what is left is so quiet and so full that it feels less like an absence of sound than like the presence of something he does not have a name for. Some would call it peace. The old tea writers had their own word for the quality the room was built to produce, and it is the last of the four principles, the one toward which all the others lead. Jaku, a deep tranquility, the stillness left when everything unnecessary has finally been set down. He is sitting, without knowing the word for it, inside Jaku. And he understands, in his body, if not in words, that he has been hungry for exactly this for a very long time. The old tea writers had a phrase for what these two men are doing right now, and it is the closest thing the way of tea has to a creed: Ichigo, Ichi-e, one time, one meeting. It means that this exact gathering, these two men, this bowl, this candle, this summer night, and this particular thread of incense already fading from the air, will never happen again. Not once in all the time the world has left. The same guests could meet in the same room tomorrow, and it would be a different evening, because they would be a day older and the flower would be a day nearer to falling, and nothing ever repeats. The dark, the crawl, the silence, the single shared bowl, all of it exists to press that one fact into the guest until he feels it in his chest, that this is happening only once, and that the only sane response to a thing that happens only once is to be entirely, completely here for it. Jinbei is here for it. After 50 years of being somewhere else, he is, at last, here. And on the other side of that thin wall, in the water room, Kiku is listening. She cannot see them, but she can read the silence she has learned over 7 years. Exactly what a good silence sounds like through a mud wall. The particular density of two people who have stopped performing for each other. She made that silence possible. She drew the water and banked the charcoal and wiped the bowl that is now empty in the master's hands, and she will wash it again tonight when they have gone, and no one out there knows her name. For a moment, something turns over in her chest that is not quite bitterness and not quite pride. She has spent the evening, as always, being the unseen 9/10. But she is beginning to suspect, and the rest of the night will test this, that being unseen and being unimportant are not the same thing, and that she may have known the secret heart of this art longer and more honestly than the wealthy man weeping quietly into a tea bowl on the other side of her wall. Now the evening turns toward its close, but slowly, the way it has done everything. The master takes back the bowl. He rinses it with a ladle of warm water, wipes the whisk, cleans the scoop, folds the silk away, the same gestures as before, run now in reverse, the room being quietly put back to sleep. But before we follow the implements out and the candle down, we need to look closely at one thing we've been holding in the dark this whole time without truly seeing it, the bowl itself. Because that bowl cracked, repaired, deliberately imperfect, worth in this period, more than the silk on Jinbei's back, is the single object that explains the entire aesthetic the way of tea was built on. And the reason a chipped cup could be treasured like a jewel is a story worth slowing down for. Chapter 11. The Treasured Imperfection, Wabi-Sabi and the Cracked Bowl. The bowl is not beautiful in any way Jinbei's silk customers would recognize. It is thick-walled and a little heavy. It is not perfectly round. You can feel, when you hold it, the places where a potter's fingers press the clay. Its glaze is dark and uneven, pooling thick in some places and thinning to bare clay at the rim in others, with a roughness underneath that catches faintly on the lip. It was not turned on a fast wheel and trimmed to mechanical perfection. It was built by hand, shaped and carved, fired quickly in a small kiln and pulled glowing from the flames. By the standards of a Chinese imperial porcelain, flawless, symmetrical, thin as an eggshell, this bowl is a crude, lumpen thing. And it is worth, in the Kyoto of 1640, more than most of what is in Jinbei's warehouse. To understand why, you have to understand the idea the tea masters built their whole sense of beauty on, an idea with a name that has since traveled all the way around the world. Wabi-Sabi. It does not translate cleanly, and people who tell you it does are usually selling something. But at its root, wabi is a kind of beauty found in simplicity, humility, and a sort of chosen poverty, the beauty of the plain and the few, rather than the rich and the many. And sabi is the beauty that time leaves behind to patina on old bronze, the silvering of weathered wood, the way a thing becomes more itself, not less, as it ages and wears. Put them together and you have a love of the imperfect, the impermanent, the incomplete, a reverence for the cracked, the asymmetric, the humble, the worn. It is, in almost every respect, the opposite of how the wealthy world around the tea room measured worth. This particular kind of bowl has a name and an origin story. It is raku-ware, and the tradition holds that it began in Rikyu's own circle in the previous century, when the master asked a tile maker named Chojiro to make him tea bowls by hand, no wheel, formed and carved one at a time, fired fast precisely, so that each one would be a little irregular, a little individual, warm in the hand and humble to the eye. The wealthy of the age were spending fortunes on flawless, imported Chinese wares. Rikyu, in his quiet, revolutionary way, turned and prized instead a bowl made by a local craftsman from local clay, a bowl whose value lay not in its perfection, but in its honesty. To drink from a raku bowl was to hold an argument in your hands that the made by human hands thing, with all its evidence of the human hands, was worth more than the flawless thing that hid them. And there is one more thing about this bowl, the thing that most clearly separates the tea master's world from our own. Run a finger along the side, and you find a fine seam where the bowl was once broken and mended, not hidden, not disguised, but repaired with lacquer dusted in gold, so that the old wound is the most visible thing on the whole vessel. This is kintsugi, the art of golden repair, and it is the purest possible expression of the whole philosophy. When this bowl cracked, no one threw it away. No one tried to make it look as though it had never broken. They mended it with gold, deliberately drawing the eye to the break, declaring that the history of the object, including its injuries, was part of its beauty, perhaps the best part. Think about how strange and how lovely that is. We live in a world that throws away the cracked thing and buys the new one. These people took the cracked thing and made the crack the most precious line on it. The story of how this kind of bowl came to be is worth telling in full, because it is the founding legend of the whole aesthetic. In Rikyu's circle in the previous century, there was a maker of roof tiles in Kyoto, a craftsman named Chojiro, by the tradition, and Rikyu is said to have asked him to make tea bowls in a wholly new way, not thrown on the fast wheel and trimmed to mechanical roundness, the way fine ceramics had always been made, but built and shaped and carved by hand, one at a time, each pressed into being by a potter's fingers and palms. They were fired in a small kiln, individually, sometimes pulled glowing from the heat. The point of all this hand labor was not efficiency, it was wildly inefficient, but humanity. A wheel-thrown bowl is perfect and anonymous. You cannot find the maker in it. A hand-built bowl carries the maker everywhere. The slight asymmetry, the pressure of a thumb, the place where the wall is a little thicker, the warmth of a thing made by a person rather than a process. This new ware took its name, the tradition holds, from a seal of honor bestowed on the family by the ruler Hideyoshi himself, and the name became raku, a word that carries a sense of ease, enjoyment, comfort. The bowl in Jinbei's hands tonight is a descendant, in spirit and often in actual lineage, of those first revolutionary cups. These bowls came chiefly in two characters, and a host chose between them with care. The black ones, glazed dark and deep, were fired hot and pulled quickly, and Rikyu is said to have prized them especially for their quiet, their gravity, the way they made the green of the tea glow against the darkness, like a lamp in a shadowed room. The red ones, warmer and softer in color, glowed with a gentler, more inviting warmth. A host would choose a black bowl or a red one to suit the season. The guest, the mood he wished to make a black bowl for a solemn winter koicha, perhaps a warmer tone for a gentler occasion. Tonight, in the deep summer dark, the master has chosen a dark bowl, and you now understand exactly why. In this room lit by a single candle, the dark bowl makes the most of what little light there is, gathering it, holding it, letting the tea become the brightest thing in the room. Even the color of the clay was a decision about light. A connoisseur like Jinbei knows that a tea bowl is read, not just used, and that there is a right way to read one. When the tea is drunk and the moment comes to admire the vessel, the guest takes it up with respect, lowers it close to the mat, so that if it slips, it has nowhere to fall, and turns it slowly to take in the whole of it, the glaze, the rim, the way the light moves on the surface, and, crucially, the foot. The foot of the bowl, the carved ring it stands on, was considered one of the truest places to find the maker's hand and spirit, because it was where the carving tool had worked most freely, and a knowing guest will gently tilt the bowl to study how the foot was cut. None of this is idle. It is a language of appreciation as precise as a wine expert's, developed over generations, and to perform it well is to honor both the maker and the host who chose the piece. Jinbei has done this for 40 years, and his hands know the courtesy as well as his eyes know silk. There is something in this that the generation watching tonight may feel more keenly than most. Those who lived through hard years, who learned to darn the sock rather than discard it, to keep the old truck running one more winter, to mend and make do and mend again, who were raised by people who would no sooner throw away a repairable thing than throw away a friend. Those people understand kintsugi in their bones, even if they have never heard the word. There was a whole philosophy of repair in this country, once, before the throwaway age, a sense that a mended thing carried the dignity of its own survival. The tea masters simply made it beautiful on purpose, and put gold in the seam, and called it what it was. If you grew up in a house where things were fixed rather than replaced, I would be glad to hear about it in the comments. What your parents kept going, and how, and what it taught you. There is a direct line from that kitchen drawer of useful odds and ends to the gold in this bowl, and I suspect a fair number of you already know it. Chapter 12. Tea Utensils, worth more than castles, when objects were power. The mended bowl in Jinbei's hands is worth a small fortune, and that fact, which sounds like a curiosity, is actually a doorway into one of the strangest and most revealing chapters in the whole history of the way of tea, the period, just a generation or two before tonight, when a tea utensil could be worth more than a province, and when the right to perform the tea ceremony at all was a privilege handed out by warlords like a medal. To understand why two grown men are sitting in the dark, discussing the lineage of a bamboo scoop, as though it were a matter of state, you have to understand that, for a brief and astonishing time, it very nearly was. In the late 16th century, as the warlords fought to unify the country, the great unifier Oda Nobunaga did something shrewd and almost unbelievable. He began collecting the most famous tea utensils in the land, particular bowls, particular caddies, particular kettles, each with its own name and pedigree, objects that connoisseurs had prized for generations. And then he used them as instruments of rule. He would grant a celebrated tea caddy to a victorious general as a reward for valor. And the gift could mean more to the recipient than a grant of land or gold. This was no accident. Nobunaga deliberately made these objects into tokens of his favor, so that to own one was to wear his approval where everyone could see it. He even, by some accounts, reserved the right to hold formal tea gatherings as a privilege he personally bestowed. A general might be told he had earned the standing to practice tea, the way an officer earns a commission. Think of what that means. The hardened men who had spent their lives taking castles came to covet a little ceramic jar the size of a fist as fiercely as they coveted territory, because the jar carried something land could not. The visible, portable proof that the most powerful man in Japan valued you. The stories that came out of this period sound almost like legends, and yet they sit in the histories. There were famous tea objects said to be valued at the price of a castle or a whole domain. There are accounts of lords who, facing defeat and death, were as concerned with the fate of a single celebrated tea caddy as with their own lives. One notorious tale holds that a cornered lord, rather than let a legendary tea container fall into enemy hands, destroyed it or carried it to his end. Whether every detail is true or polished by retelling, the fact that such stories were told and believed tells you everything about the value these objects carried. We struggle, in our own age of mass production, to feel the weight of it. But imagine a single object that was at once a great work of art, a sacred relic, a banker's fortune, and a knighthood all in one small jar you could hold in your palm. That is what a famous tea caddy was. Men killed for less. Men died protecting these. There is one more episode worth pausing on because it shows the other face of the same coin. The great ruler Hideyoshi, the man of the gold tea room, Rikyu's master and eventual destroyer, once threw open a colossal tea gathering near Kyoto and invited, by proclamation, anyone at all to come, from the highest lord to the humblest townsman, so long as they brought a kettle, a well bucket, and the will to take part. For a few days, the most exclusive practice in the land became, briefly, the most inclusive. Tea served power both ways. It could be a velvet rope, marking who was in and who was out, and it could be a grand gesture of a ruler showing himself as patron of the whole people. Either way, the lesson is the same one Jinbei is living tonight. In this world, objects and rituals were not idle decoration. They were how power spoke. A bowl was a sentence, a caddy was a paragraph, and a man who understood the language of these things held a kind of fluency that mattered, in its way, as much as a sword. Which is why, by the calmer year of 1640, a silk merchant and an old tea master can sit together and treat a bamboo scoop as a thing with a biography. The age of warlords killing over tea jars has passed. The country is at peace now under the new order, and tea has settled back from an instrument of war into an art of living. But the reverence for the named object, the sense that a humble thing can carry the whole weight of who has held it and loved it before you, survived the transition intact. When Jinbei asks the master in a moment about the scoop in the bowl, he is not making small talk. He is asking, in the polite code of his time, to be told the lineage, the where it came from, and who held it before of objects he understands to be, in their modest way, sacred. And the master, pleased, will tell him the way an old man tells the history of a family. That conversation, quiet as it is the living echo of an age when such objects were worth more than castles. Let us listen to it. Chapter 13. The lighter tea and the loosening of tongues. After the solemnity of the thick tea comes its gentler companion, usucha, thin tea, the frothy, bright version most of us picture. Now the master uses far less powder and more water, and whisks briskly, the wrist flicking back and forth until the surface rises into a pale jade foam. And with the thin tea, the whole register of the evening relaxes by a few degrees. The thick tea was the sacred center, taken in near silence. The thin tea is its easing out, and here, at last, the two men begin to actually talk quietly, unhurriedly, the way you talk to someone late at night when the important thing has already passed between you and what is left is the pleasure of company. They talk about the flower in the alcove and where it was cut and how few days it has left. They talk about the bowl, and Jinbei asks because it is proper to ask about its history, and the master tells him the small lineage of it, who made it and who owned it before, the way you might tell the provenance of a family watch. They talk about the scoop, which Soetsu cut tan himself from a length of bamboo years ago and gave a name because tea scoops, absurdly and wonderfully, were often named the way one might name a boat. These objects are not props to these men. They are companions with biographies. And in discussing them, host and guest are really discussing taste and memory and the long chain of people who have knelt in rooms like this one, passing the same humble things hand to hand down the generations. It is worth pausing on what Jinbei is in the order of his world, because the silk that gives this evening its quiet luxury and gives our story its name runs straight through the heart of his peculiar position. He is richer in coin than many a samurai who would expect him to bow low in the street. And yet, by the strict letter of his society's order, he sits near the bottom of it, the old fourfold scheme inherited from China. Rank the warrior at the top, then the farmer who fed the realm, then the artisan who made its goods, and last of all, the merchant, who was thought to produce nothing and merely move other men's labor about for profit. A man like Jinbei lived every day inside that contradiction, indispensable and looked down upon, wealthy and outranked, an engine of the city's life, and officially its least honorable part. There were even sumptuary laws meant to keep men like him in their place, rules about what cloth a commoner could wear, what colors, what display was permitted to whom, so that the very silk he traded in, the finest of it, was in principle reserved for bettors who frequently could not actually afford it. And this is where the tea room did something for a man like Jinbei that nothing else in his life could. In the wider world, no amount of money could buy him rank. The order was fixed at birth, and a merchant stayed a merchant. But the tea room did not run on rank. It ran on discernment, on whether you could read a scroll, judge a bowl, handle the silk and the scoop correctly, recognize the quality of a thing and the thought behind a gathering, and discernment could be earned. A merchant who studied tea for 30 years could become a connoisseur whose judgment a great lord would actually respect, could sit on the same mats as his social betters and meet them, for an evening, as something close to an equal. The way of tea was one of the very few ladders in that rigid world that a man could climb by effort rather than by birth, and the merchants of the cities knew it and threw themselves into it and became some of its greatest patrons and practitioners precisely because it offered them a dignity their wealth alone could not buy. The silk folded on the mat, tonight the fukusa, the very emblem of the practice, is, in a quiet way, Jinbei's own world turned to a sacred purpose. The cloth he spent his life trading, lifted out of the marketplace and made into an instrument of grace. There is, if you let yourself feel it, something almost redemptive in that. The thing the world used to keep him in his place became, in this room, the thing that let him rise above it. And here's where I pay back a tease from earlier, the person at the far end of the green powder, whom Jinbei will never meet. The matcha in tonight's bowl began its life as leaves on shaded tea bushes in the hills around Uji, south of the city, where growers had learned to cover the plants with screens for weeks before harvest, starving them of full sun so the leaves would grow tender and sweet and deep green. The youngest leaves were picked by hand, often women's hands, quick and practiced, then steamed, dried, and stripped of stem and vein to make a flaky raw tea called tencha. And then someone, somewhere, in a cold back room, sat down at a stone mill, 2 heavy carved discs, one turning on the other, and ground that tencha into powder by hand, one slow revolution at a time. This is the unglamorous arithmetic behind the luxury. A good stone mill turned at the patient pace that keeps the powder from scorching and going bitter from the friction's heat, yields only about an ounce of matcha in an hour of steady cranking. 1 hour for one small bowl's worth of powder, plus more. Every cup of tea Suetsu has ever served sits on top of hours of someone's cold, monotonous, anonymous labor at a grindstone work as repetitive as anything in a wartime factory, as patient as anything on the home front, and just as invisible to the people who enjoyed its fruit. Forget the romance for one moment and do the math, and the serene bowl of green in a quiet, dark room turns out to rest, like almost all beautiful things, on a great deal of unbeautiful work done by people whose names did not survive. Jinbei drinks. He does not think about the grindstone. Almost no one ever did. But we can, for a moment, on their behalf. The talk drifts where good late talk drifts, which is to say, lightly and without aim. But every subject they touch is keyed, still, to the season and the night. They speak of the flower what it is, where the master cut it, how it was chosen to lean toward the candle, how few days it has left before it falls. They speak of the heat that is finally breaking, and of the first faint signal in the night air, of the autumn that is still weeks off, but already, somehow, present, the way a guest's coat by the door tells you the evening is ending before anyone has risen. In another season, the host might recite, or the guest might recognize, a fragment of old poetry suited to the moment, for the way of tea and the way of poetry were close cousins, both built on the same delicate art of saying much by saying little, of letting a single image carry a whole mood. The scroll that hung in the first half of the evening was itself a line of such verse, and now, in the talk, its theme returns without anyone naming it. The brevity of the summer night, the sweetness of what does not last. And Jinbei asks, as a good guest asks, after the implements, the bowl's history, and the scoops, and its name. The master tells him, unhurried, the small biography of each. Who made the scoop, what its name means, the line of poetry it was drawn from, whose hands the bowl passed through before it came to this house. To a stranger, it would sound like an old man fussing over trifles. To these two men, it is something closer to genealogy, the recitation of a small, noble lineage, a way of placing tonight's gathering in a long chain of gatherings, stretching back through the generations. Jinbei is not merely being entertained. He is being told that he has been admitted, for one evening, into the company of everyone who has ever knelt before these same objects, all the way back, that he is now part of the bowl's story too. One more name in a line that will go on after him. It is a quiet kind of immortality, the only kind these objects can offer, and both men feel its weight without naming it. Then the master sets the scoop down, and the talk falls gently quiet, and they both feel the evening reaching the edge of its natural close. As the thin tea and the talk wind down, the candle has burned noticeably lower, and both men feel, without saying it, that the evening has reached its natural end, not because anyone is tired or has somewhere to be, but because the thing has completed its shape, the way a piece of music arrives at its final chord, and in your body, before the sound fades, that it is over. Jinbei makes the small, formal speeches of gratitude that custom requires, and they are not empty. He means them more than he expected to. He asks, one last time, to look at the bowl and the scoop, holding each near the dying candle. And then he prepares to do the last thing the evening asks of him, which is the first thing it asked of him: run backward, to bow, to kneel, and to crawl back out through the tiny door into the night. but changed. In some small way he could not name, and will spend a few quiet days afterward trying to. Before he goes, though, there is the matter of the candle itself, and of the woman behind the wall, and of how, exactly, you end a thing like this. Chapter 14. Women and the Way of Tea. The history the candle kept dark. The woman behind the wall, Kiku, who drew the water and banked the fire and made the soup the guest closed his eyes to taste deserves, before the evening ends, a fuller accounting than the evening itself will ever give her. Because her near invisibility tonight is not an accident of one household. It is the shape of a much larger history, and it is worth turning the candle, just for a chapter, onto the question that history mostly left in the dark. Where, exactly, were the women in the way of tea? The plain answer for this period is that the formal seat at the gathering the place Jinbei occupies tonight, the guest who crawls through the door and shares the bowl, was with rare exceptions, a place for men. The way of tea in the early 17th century was practiced and taught and theorized largely by men, by samurai, by wealthy merchants, by priests, by the professional tea masters of the great lineages. The famous names that come down to us from this age are almost all men's names. A respectable townswoman or a samurai's wife of 1640 would not ordinarily have been a guest at a formal gathering like this one, and would certainly not have been expected to train as a master and take her own pupils. The door that humbled lords and equalized merchants did not, in this era, open equally to women. That is the honest historical record, and it does no one any favors to pretend otherwise. But to stop there would be to make exactly the mistake the Candlelight makes, to confuse not being seen with not being there. Women were woven through the world of tea at almost every point, except the celebrated center. They did the labor that made it possible, as Kiku does tonight, the drawing of water, the tending of fire, the preparation of food, the endless washing. In countless homes, women kept the everyday knowledge of preparing tea alive as a domestic accomplishment, served within the family where no historian was taking notes. Daughters of tea-connected households absorbed the forms by growing up inside them. In the whole supply chain that fed the practice, the picking of the shaded leaves in the hills of Uji, often women's quick and practice work, the spinning and weaving of the silk for the fukusa cloth and the guests' robes. The very trade Kiku's family lived by ran in significant part on women's hands. The way of tea floated, as serene surfaces always do, on a great deal of submerged female labor that its own aesthetics were designed not to notice. There were other paths too, more complicated ones. In the pleasure quarters and entertainment districts of the cities, accomplished female entertainers were often trained in the tea procedures alongside music and poetry and conversation, because mastery of such refined arts was part of their cultivation. It is an uncomfortable corner of the history, and it would be wrong to romanticize it. These were women whose lives were constrained in ways we should not gloss over. But it is also true that some of the most technically skilled tea practitioners outside the formal lineages in this period were women whom respectable society kept at arm's length, even as it prized their artistry. Skill, it turns out, lived in many rooms the official history did not bother to visit. The candle reached very few of them. And here the story does, eventually, turn though Kiku will not live to see it, and that is part of its sadness. In the centuries after this evening, and especially as Japan moved into the modern age, the way of tea opened its doors. By the late 19th and 20th centuries, tea practice had become something studied and taught widely among women, woven into girls' education, until in time, women would make up the great majority of tea practitioners in the country, and women would become revered masters and teachers in their own right, holding the lineages that men had once guarded. The art that in 1640 kept a woman in the water room would one day be carried forward, preserved, and deepened largely by women's hands. Kiku could not know that, but if there is any justice in the long arc of these things, it is that the very people the candlelight was designed not to reach turned out, in the end, to be the ones who kept the flame alive at all. Those of you who learned a craft or a discipline from a mother or grandmother, something she was never formally credited for, but carried and passed on anyway, will know exactly the kind of quiet inheritance I mean, and I would be glad to hear about it below. But all of that lies in a future Kiku cannot see. And tonight, she is simply waiting, tray ready, for the small sound that will tell her the evening is ending and she is needed. On the other side of the wall, the thin tea is finished, the talk has wound down to its last soft threads, and the guest is gathering himself to leave. We have circled the whole long history of who was seen and who was not, and now the evening itself is asking to be let go. So let us return to the room, to the two men and the dying candle, and the woman waiting at the threshold, and watch, slowly, and with the attention the thing deserves, exactly how you bring an evening like this to its close. Chapter 15. Stillness in the final sip. How the evening ends. The leaving is as deliberate as the arriving. Jinbei does not stand and stretch and make for the door the way a man leaves a tavern. He bows to the host, low and unhurried. He bows once more toward the alcove, taking his leave of the flower as he greeted it. Then he turns to the little door, kneels, slides the panel back, and folds himself once more through the 2-foot square. And on the way out, by old custom, he pauses on the stepping stone just beyond it and looks back into the glowing room for a moment before he straightens. It is a last look. It is the evening's way of admitting, in a single small gesture, what Ichigo Ichii has been saying all along, that he will not see this exact room, this exact light, this exact arrangement ever again, and that the right thing to do with a thing that will not return is to turn before you go and let yourself feel it leave. There are last courtesies, and they are not rushed. Before the guest goes, the host sees him to the door, and there is a final exchange of bows and of the small set phrases that custom provides for thanking a host and taking one's leave, phrases worn smooth by centuries of use and meant precisely because they are not original. We sometimes look down on formula, on the set thing said at the set time, as if only spontaneous words are sincere. The way of tea knew better. It understood that at the moments of deepest feeling, a leave-taking, a thanks, a parting, that both men know will not come again. In quite this form, the worn old phrase, the one everyone has always said, can carry more than any clever improvisation, because it joins this one parting to every parting that came before it. Jinbei says the old words. The master answers with the old words. And in the worn grooves of that exchange, two men who have shared something they cannot name say goodbye in a language older than either of them. And then comes the small gesture the form prescribes, and the heart, tonight, genuinely means, pausing on the stone just outside the little door to look back, once, into the room. It is the same room he crawled into hours ago as a busy, calculating, important man. It looks different now, though nothing in it has changed but the height of the candle or rather, nothing in it has changed but him. The rough walls he barely noticed on arriving now seem to him quietly perfect. The single flower, the dark bowl set aside, the worn mats, the failing flame, he takes them in all at once, knowing he will not see this exact arrangement again, that tomorrow the flower will have opened or fallen, and the season will have shifted one notch further on, and he himself will be a day older and back inside the noise. The looking back is the form's way of teaching him to feel the leaving, to let the evening be over rather than simply ending. He looks. He lets it go. Then he straightens and turns and walks out into the dark. Then he is gone back down the dewy path, back through the gate, back into the sleeping lanes of Kyoto and the ledger and the rank and the whole noisy daylight world that will reclaim him by morning. But not entirely. He carries something out with him that he did not bring in, something the dark room poured into the space the garden had emptied. He will be a little slower tomorrow. He will notice, washing his hands at his own basin, the cold of the water. He will hold a cup, any cup, a beat longer than he used to. The evening did not change his life. The tea ceremony rarely changes a life. What it does, what it did for Jinbei tonight, is quieter and more durable than that. It reminds a person, for a few hours, of how to be where he actually is. And a person who has been reminded once can be reminded again. Inside, the master kneels alone for a while in the room his guest has left. This too is part of it, a part no guest ever sees. The host does not rush to clear up. He sits in the afterglow of the gathering, in the company of the objects that served it, and lets the evening settle into memory before he disturbs it. There is a melancholy in this, the particular melancholy of anyone who has spent themselves making something beautiful and brief for another person, and now sits in the quiet after the entertainer, after the room empties, the cook after the plates are cleared, the parent after the children are finally, blessedly asleep. He is 60 years past, and he has done this thousands of times, and it still costs him something each time. And that cost is exactly why it is worth anything at all. A thing given freely is only given if it could have been withheld. There is a thing the old masters understood about giving, and the master is living inside it now, in the empty room, in the after. To make something beautiful for another person, really make it, with your whole attention, knowing it will last only an evening and then be gone is a strange kind of labor, because it produces nothing you can keep. He has nothing to show for tonight. There is no object he has gained, no profit, no monument. The evening happened, and it was, by his own quiet judgment, a good one. And now it is over and will never be repeated, and the only place it survives is in two memories, his and a silk merchant's walking home through the dark. And yet he would not trade this work for any other, and has not, across 40 years of it, because he learned long ago the thing that the way of tea exists to teach, that the value of a thing is not lessened by its brevity, that in fact the brevity may be the whole of the value, and that a life spent making beautiful, temporary things for other people, meals, evenings, kindnesses, small, perfect hours that vanish as soon as they are complete, is not a lesser life than one spent piling up things that last. It may be the better one. The candle gutters. He gathers his bowl. He is tired in the particular, clean way of a man who has done his work well. And then Kiku comes in. She has waited, as she always waits, for the small sound that means the host is ready to be helped. And she enters softly, on her knees, to begin gathering the bowl and the whisk and the scoop and carrying them back to the water room, where the evening, for her, will end as it began, in washing. But tonight, something happens that has not happened before, or has happened so rarely she could count the times. As she lifts the empty bowl, the old master speaks. He says, without looking up, that the soup tonight was exactly right, that the guest had closed his eyes at the first taste, and that he, Soetsu, had known the moment he tasted it himself this afternoon that it would be so. He says it plainly, the way you state a fact. And then he is quiet again. It is not much. A modern ear might strain to even call it praise. But Kiku has spent 7 years being the unseen 9/10, and she understands exactly what has just been given to her and how rare it is, and what it costs a man like the master to give it. He saw her. For one sentence, in the dark, after the guest had gone, the part of the beautiful thing that no one is supposed to see was seen and named by the one person whose seeing she'd quietly wanted all along. She bows her head over the bowl so he will not see her face do what it is doing. And the question she has carried for 7 years, whether being unseen and being unimportant are the same thing, answers itself, gently, in the warm dark of an empty tea room. They are not the same thing. They were never the same thing. The grindstone turner, the well drawer, the soup maker, the bowl washer, the whole submerged base of every beautiful, brief evening were never unimportant. They were only unseen. And being seen, even once, even briefly, turns out to be enough to carry a person a very long way. When the implements are gathered and carried out, the master does the last thing of the night. He reaches over and with a small, careful gesture, puts out the candle. For a moment, the room holds the memory of the light, the afterimage swimming, the smell of the spent wick, the warmth still in the air, and then the dark comes down fully, and the little room that held an entire evening becomes once more just a small empty box of mud and straw and timber, waiting in the night for whatever the next day will or will not bring. The flower in the alcove, which no one is looking at now, goes on quietly being beautiful in the dark anyway. That perhaps was the whole lesson, hiding in plain sight the entire time. Chapter 16. What the tea room still teaches. A closing reflection. So what was it all for the tiny door, the cold basin, the dark room, the cracked bowl, the hours of hidden labor behind a few minutes of shared quiet? Step back far enough, and the answer comes into focus, and it is larger than tea. These people, living in a violent and uncertain age, on a chain of islands shaken by earthquakes and swept by fire and plague, in a society that pressed on every soul the crushing weight of rank and obligation, these people built, deliberately, a small room where the weight could be set down. Not escaped, not denied. Set down for a few hours by mutual agreement, so that a human being could remember what he was underneath all of it. The tea room was their answer to a problem we have not solved either. How do you stay awake to your own brief life while the world does everything in its power to put you to sleep? And the remarkable thing is how little it took. No machine, no money in the end, no spectacle, a pot of water, a handful of green powder, a cracked bowl mended with gold, a single flower, one candle, and the discipline to use no more. The way of tea is when you strip it all the way down, a sustained argument that the materials for a meaningful life are almost embarrassingly humble and lie within reach of nearly anyone, and are missed not because they are rare, but but because we are too hurried and too crowded and too busy pricing everything to notice them sitting right there in our own hands. The tea masters did not have more than we have. By almost every material measure, they had vastly less. What they had was the attention to use it well, and the courage, Riku's courage, paid in full to insist that this mattered more than gold. We tend in our own time to imagine that the cure for a frantic life lies somewhere out ahead of us, in the next purchase, the next destination, the next device that promises to give us back the time the last one took. The people in this story would have found that idea gently funny. They would have pointed instead to the cold water in the basin, and the warmth of a bowl in two hands, and the way a single flower leans toward a single flame. And they would have said, in effect, it was here the whole time. You walked past it on a smooth, fast path and never looked down. Slow the path. Make it a little harder. Bend low at the door and see what you find waiting in the dark on the other side. It is the oldest counsel there is and the hardest to actually take. And they took it, night after night, 400 years ago, in a room the size of a closet, by the light of one candle. Spare a last thought, too, for the ones the room kept in shadow for Kiku, and the soup, and the bowl, washed clean again before sunrise. For the cold hands at the grindstone in Uji, for the potter who pressed his fingers into the clay, for every anonymous pair of hands whose patient work floated the serene surface that history remembered and named. The way of tea has come down to us as the achievement of its masters, and so it was. But it was also, always, the achievement of the unnamed, the women and the laborers and the makers and the menders, whose contribution the candlelight was literally designed not to reach. If this evening is worth anything, part of what it is worth is the chance to turn the candle, just once, toward them. They were never unimportant. They were only unseen. And to see them now, across 400 years, costs us nothing but the willingness to look. In the quiet of that little room, in the warmth of a bowl passed hand to hand, in the gold poured into a broken thing to make it whole, their voices still reach us if we are willing to slow down enough to listen. If tonight's journey stirred something, a memory of your own, a thing your parents or grandparents kept and mended and made do with, an evening you once spent somewhere so still that time seemed to set its burden down, I would be honored if you shared it in the comments below. And if you have ever sat at a tea ceremony yourself, in Kyoto or anywhere, I would dearly love to hear how the real thing compared to this small, painted version of it. Your generation holds a great deal of history that never made it into the books, including perhaps your own quiet evenings by a single lamp. That history is irreplaceable, and the comment section is yours. So put out your own candle gently tonight, whatever form it takes. Hold the last warm thing in your hands a moment longer than you need to. And remember that the people who built that small, dark room knew something we keep forgetting and keep, slowly, relearning, that the whole of a life is only ever the sum of its single evenings, that each one comes exactly once and never returns, and that the right way to meet a thing that happens only once is to be, for the length of it, entirely and quietly here. Rest well, and I will see you in the next one.